Hello, everyone, and welcome back. The pain of losing a loved one is incredibly difficult, and everyone copes with it differently. In today's story, a father grieving the loss of his wife heard a rather shocking comment from his own child, a remark concerning the love he had for the different women in his life. What was the father's reaction? And was their relationship impacted? We're about to find out. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and let us know your thoughts.
In the heart of Asheville, North Carolina, where the Blue Ridge Mountains framed the horizon and the streets hummed with the charm of local breweries and artisanal shops, Evan Harper stood behind the counter of his small bookstore, the Page Haven. The shop smelled of old paper and fresh coffee, its shelves lined with novels and poetry that offered escape to anyone who wandered in. At 29, Evan was a quiet man. His dark hair perpetually tousled his hazel eyes, carrying a weight that belied his easy smile. He loved the rhythm of his life, helping customers find the perfect book, sipping coffee with his regulars, and losing himself in the pages of a good story. But beneath the calm exterior, a storm of unresolved grief simmered, one that had been part of him since he was 7 years old, when his mother's death left a hole in his world. The bookstore's bell jingled, and Evan looked up to see his older brother Ryan stride in his work boots, leaving faint traces of mud on the hardwood floor. At 30, Ryan was taller, broader, with a no-nonsense demeanor honed by years as a construction engineer. His blue eyes, so like their late mother's, were stormy today, and Evan knew why before Ryan even opened his mouth. "Dad's at it again," Ryan said, tossing his jacket over a chair, ranting about how everyone's trying to push him into dating. "You'd think Clara's been gone a week, not 2 years. His tone was sharp-laced with the bitterness that had defined his relationship with their father David for decades. Evan sighed, setting down the book he'd been shelving. "What happened this time?" he asked, though he could guess. Their father, David Harper, lived in a cozy craftsman-style house on the edge of town, a place filled with memories of 2 marriages. One to Evan and Ryan's mother Ellen, who died when they were children, and another to Clara, the mother of their half-siblings Sophie and Liam, who passed away 2 years ago. David had remarried barely a year after Ellen's death, a decision that had left Evan and Ryan reeling as boys, forced to navigate a new family while still mourning their mother. Now David's refusal to move on after Clara's death felt like a stark contrast, a wound Ryan couldn't stop picking at. "Some friend of his tried to set him up with a woman from their church group," Ryan said, leaning against the counter. "Dad lost it. Went on about how Clara's barely cold in the ground, and how insensitive it is to expect him to date again. I couldn't take it, Ev. I told him he didn't have a problem moving on when Mom died. Told him to go screw himself." Ryan's voice cracked, his anger masking a deeper pain, and Evan felt a familiar ache in his chest. He'd spent years burying his own resentment. But Ryan's words brought it all rushing back, the memory of their father's dates, the women who'd come and go before he settled on Clara. The feeling of being pushed aside while still grieving. Evan ran a hand through his hair, his voice low. "You said that to his face?" Ryan nodded, unapologetic. "Yeah. And I'd say it again. He was out there dating 5 months after Mom died, Civ. 5. We were kids trying to figure out how to live without her, and he was bringing home random women. Now he's acting like Clara was the love of his life, and he can't move on. It's bullshit." Evan didn't respond immediately, his mind flashing to those blurry childhood years, the awkward dinners with their father's dates, the way Clara had tried to fill a role that felt sacred. He'd never confronted David the way Ryan had, but the hurt was there, a quiet scar that never quite healed. That evening, the Harper family gathered at David's house for dinner, a rare attempt at togetherness. The dining room was warm lit by a chandelier that cast soft shadows on the walls. The table laden with roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and collard greens, a nod to Clara's southern roots. David, at 55, sat at the head of the table, his graying hair and tired eyes betraying the toll of the past 2 years. Sophie, 19, and Liam, 20, sat across from Evan and Ryan, their youthful energy a contrast to the tension simmering beneath the surface. Sophie, a college student with her mother's bright smile, tried to keep the conversation light, chatting about her art classes, while Liam, a quiet, aspiring musician, picked at his food. David cleared his throat, setting down his fork. "I had a talk with Pastor Jim today," he said, his voice heavy. "He tried to introduce me to some woman from the choir. Said it's been 2 years, and I should get back out there. Can you believe that Clara's barely gone, and they're acting like I should just forget her?" His words were laced with indignation, and Evan felt Ryan tense beside him. Sophie reached for the potatoes, her voice cheerful. "Dad, they just want you to be happy." "Maybe they mean well." But Ryan's patience snapped. "Happy," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "You didn't have a problem being happy when Mom died, Dad. 6 months, and you were already dating. A year later, you were married. Don't talk to us about how hard it is to move on." The table fell silent. Sophie's fork frozen midair. Liam's eyes wide. David's face reddened, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Ryan, that's not fair," he said, his voice low but shaking. "You don't know what it was like being a single dad with 2 kids. I was trying to keep our family together." Ryan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Keep our family together. You replaced Mom before we could even process she was gone. And now you're whining about Clara like she was the only one who mattered. Go screw yourself, Dad." He stormed out the front door, slamming behind him. Evan's heart pounded, his own anger rising, but he stayed seated, his eyes locked on his father. David looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words that wouldn't come. Sophie broke the silence, her voice trembling. "Dad, he didn't mean that." But Evan shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. "He meant it, Sophie. And he's not wrong. You were dating 5 months after Mom died, Dad. We were kids trying to hold on to her, and you were moving on. It's hard to hear you talk about Clara like she was your only love when we lived through that." David's eyes widened, hurt and anger flashing across his face. "Evan, it wasn't like that," he said, but Evan stood, his hands shaking. "Maybe it wasn't. But that's how it felt. And you've never asked us how we felt." The room felt suffocating, the weight of years of unspoken pain pressing down. Evan walked out, leaving David with Sophie and Liam, the dinner forgotten. As he stepped into the cool Asheville night, the mountain air sharp against his skin, Evan felt the past and present colliding. The bookstore, the family dinners, the memories of his mother, they were all part of a story he'd never fully told. And now, with Ryan's anger and David's defensiveness, Evan knew the time for silence was over. The question was whether they could face the truth together, or if the shadows of love would keep them apart. The cool Asheville night wrapped around Evan Harper as he stepped out of his father's house, the echo of the slammed door still ringing in his ears. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant hum of downtown. His heart pounded, not just from the confrontation with David, but from the weight of memories that had surged to the surface. Memories of his mother Ellen, her laughter, her warm hands, and the aching void she'd left when she died. Evan was 7, then Ryan 8, and their father's rapid move to date again had felt like a betrayal, a wound that had never fully healed. Now, 22 years later, David's indignation about being pushed to date after Clara's death had ripped that wound open, and Evan wasn't sure he could stitch it back together. Ryan was already halfway down the street, his silhouette sharp against the glow of streetlights, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Evan caught up, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Ryan, wait." He called, his voice low but urgent. Ryan slowed, but didn't turn, his shoulders rigid. "What's the point, Ev? He doesn't get it. He never has." Evan fell into step beside him, the gravel crunching under their feet. "I know," he said quietly. "But storming off isn't going to make him understand. You saw his face, he was blindsided." Ryan snorted, his breath a sharp puff in the night. Good. Maybe he needs to feel what we felt. Like we didn't matter. Evan didn't respond immediately, his mind tangled in the past. He remembered the women David had brought home after their mother's death. Awkward dinners where Evan and Ryan sat silent, picking at their food, while their father tried to act like everything was normal. Clara, who became their stepmother, had been kind, but her presence had felt like an invasion, a replacement for a mother they weren't ready to let go. Now David's refusal to move on after Clara's death, coupled with his complaints about insensitive friends, felt like a slap in the face. "I'm not saying he's right," Evan said finally, "but maybe there's more to it. Maybe he's hurting in a way we don't see." Ryan stopped turning to face him, his eyes blazing. "Don't defend him, Ev. He was dating 5 months after Mom died. 5. We were kids trying to hold on to her memory, and he was out there looking for a new wife. Now he's acting like Clara was his one true love. It's like Mom never existed." Evan's chest tightened the truth in Ryan's words, cutting deep. He'd spent years pushing down his own resentment, focusing on his bookstore, his quiet life, but Ryan's anger was a mirror to his own buried pain. "I'm not defending him," Evan said, his voice steady. "I'm just saying we need to figure out how to deal with this. Otherwise, it's just going to keep eating at us." The next day, Evan returned to the Page Haven, the bookstore, a sanctuary of sorts. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the shelves, where he'd spent countless hours escaping into stories. But today the books offered little comfort. His phone buzzed with a text from David. "Can we talk? I didn't mean to upset you and Ryan." Evan stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of him wanted to ignore it to let David stew in his own guilt. But another part, the part that remembered his father's tired eyes at dinner, urged him to respond. He typed a curt reply. "Fine. Meet me at the shop this afternoon." David arrived just after lunch, his broad frame filling the doorway. At 55, he looked older than Evan remembered, his gray hair thinning, his shoulders slightly stooped. The bookstore was quiet, save for the soft jazz playing in the background, and Evan gestured to a table near the coffee bar. "Thanks for coming," he said, his tone neutral. David nodded, sitting down with a heavy sigh. "Evan, I didn't expect things to blow up like that last night. I know Ryan's mad, and you're not happy either. I don't know how to fix this." Evan leaned back, crossing his arms. "Start by explaining why it's so different this time," he said, his voice low but pointed. "You were dating months after Mom died. You married Clara in just over a year. But now, 2 years after Clara, you're acting like moving on is impossible. It makes it feel like Mom didn't matter to you." David's face paled, his hands clenching on the table. "That's not true," he said, his voice rough. "I loved your mother, Evan. I loved her so much it nearly broke me when she died. But I had you and Ryan, 2 little boys who needed me. I thought finding someone new would give you a family again, a mother figure. Maybe I moved too fast, but I was trying to do right by you." Evan's throat tightened, the sincerity in David's voice clashing with the hurt he'd carried for years. "You didn't ask us what we needed," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were kids, Dad. We needed you, not a new mom. And when you brought those women home, it felt like you were erasing her." David's eyes glistened, and he looked away, his jaw working. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I thought I was giving you stability. I was wrong, Evan. I see that now. But Clara, losing her was different. I'm older, and I don't have the energy to start over. It's not that I loved her more, it's that I'm not the same man I was back then." The confession hung between them, raw and heavy. Evan wanted to believe his father, but the pain of those childhood years was a stubborn knot in his chest. Before he could respond, the bell jingled, and Sophie walked in, her art portfolio tucked under her arm. At 19, she was a bright spark, her curly hair and quick smile a reminder of Clara. "Hey, Evan," she said, then hesitated, sensing the tension. "Dad, you okay?" David managed a weak smile. Just talking things out, he said. Sophie glanced at Evan, her expression cautious. I heard about last night, she said. Ryan's really upset. Maybe we could all talk as a family? Evan nodded, though the idea of another family meeting felt daunting. I'll try to get Ryan there, he said, but he's not in a talking mood. Sophie bit her lip, then said, I found something at the house you might want to see. Some old photos and stuff. Of your mom. Evan's breath caught, and he exchanged a glance with David, who looked as surprised as he felt. Bring them to the house tonight. David said, his voice soft. We'll all sit down. That evening, Evan drove to David's house, his stomach churning with anticipation. Ryan had reluctantly agreed to come, though his texts were curt, laced with lingering anger. The Craftsman house glowed under the porch light, its familiar warmth undercut by the tension of the previous night. Inside, Sophie had set up a small box on the dining table, its contents spilling out. Faded photos, a handwritten recipe card, a scarf that still carried the faint scent of Ellen's perfume. Evan's heart clenched as he picked up a photo of his mother, her blue eyes bright, her arm around a younger David. Ryan stood in the doorway, his expression guarded, but his eyes softened as he saw the photo. Found this in the attic, Sophie said, her voice gentle. Mom Clara kept it safe. She always said your mom was part of the family even after she was gone. Evan's throat tightened and he glanced at David, who was staring at the photo with a mix of grief and love. I didn't know Clara kept these, David said, his voice breaking. She never wanted to replace Ellen. She just tried to make a home for all of us. Ryan's jaw tightened and he crossed his arms. Then why didn't you talk to us, Dad? You brought home dates, moved Clara in, and we were just supposed to deal with it. We were kids. David's eyes filled with tears, and he sank into a chair. I was scared, he admitted. Scared of raising you alone, scared of failing you. I thought Clara could help us heal. I didn't see how much it hurt you. The admission was a crack in the wall between them, and Evan felt a small opening where understanding might take root. But Ryan wasn't ready to let go. You didn't see, because you didn't look, he said, his voice sharp. And now you're acting like Clara's the only one who mattered. You're sitting here whining about not moving on when you couldn't wait to move on from Mom. David flinched, and Sophie stepped forward, her voice trembling. Ryan, that's not fair. Dad loved your mom. He kept her things, told us stories about her. He was hurting too. Ryan's eyes flashed, but he didn't interrupt, and Sophie continued. When Mom Clara died, it broke him. But that doesn't mean he loved your mom less. Maybe he just didn't know how to show it. The room grew quiet, the weight of Sophie's words settling over them. Evan picked up the scarf, running his fingers over the soft fabric, memories of his mother flooding back. He looked at Ryan, whose anger seemed to waver, giving way to the grief beneath. She's right, Evan said, his voice steady. We've been carrying this for years, Ryan. But maybe Dad's been carrying something too. We need to talk about it, all of it. Ryan didn't respond, but his shoulders slumped, a sign he was listening. The next day, Evan and Ryan met at a local coffee shop, the Beanery, its walls adorned with local art and the air thick with the scent of espresso. Ryan was quieter, his anger tempered by the previous night's revelations. I don't know if I can forgive him, he admitted, staring into his coffee. But seeing Mom's stuff, it made me realize how much I've been avoiding her memory. Evan nodded, his own thoughts tangled. I've been avoiding it too, he said. Maybe if we talk about her, really talk, we can figure out how to move forward with Dad. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the counter. David was there, chatting with a friend who introduced him to a woman with a warm smile. Evan watched as David's face tightened, his voice rising. I'm not ready, he said loud enough for the shop to hear. Clara's only been gone 2 years. How can you think I'd just move on? He stormed out, leaving. The woman flustered. Ryan's eyes narrowed, and he stood following their father outside. Evan trailed behind, bracing for another explosion. "Dad, stop," Ryan called, catching up on the sidewalk. David turned his face a mix of anger and exhaustion. "What, Ryan? You gonna tell me to screw myself again?" Ryan's fists clenched, but he took a breath. "No," he said. "But you need to hear this. You moved on so fast after Mom it felt like she didn't matter. And now you're acting like Clara's the only one you can't let go of. Do you know how that feels to us?" David's shoulders sagged, and he looked at his sons, his voice breaking. "I loved your mother. I still do. But I was young, scared, and I made mistakes. I'm sorry, Ryan. I'm sorry, Evan." The apology was a small bridge, fragile, but real. Evan felt the knot in his chest loosen just a fraction. Ryan's eyes glistened, but he didn't walk away. The three stood there, the Asheville street bustling around them, the weight of years of silence beginning to lift. The question now was whether they could rebuild, or if the shadows of love would keep them tethered to the past. The Asheville street buzzed with the gentle hum of evening life locals strolling past art galleries, the distant strum of a busker's guitar. But for Evan Harper, Ryan, and their father David, the world seemed to narrow to the sidewalk where they stood. David's apology, raw and unguarded, hung in the air like a fragile thread, connecting them across years of unspoken pain. "I loved your mother. I still do. But I was young, scared, and I made mistakes. I'm sorry, Ryan. I'm sorry, Evan." His voice broke, his tired eyes glistening under the streetlights. Evan felt a shift in his chest, a loosening of the knot that had tied his heart since childhood. Ryan, his fists still clenched, didn't speak, but the rigid line of his shoulders softened a sign he was listening. Evan took a step closer, his voice steady, but thick with emotion. "We needed you to say that, Dad. Not just now, but back then. We were kids trying to hold on to Mom, and it felt like you were pulling her away." David's face crumpled and he nodded, wiping a hand across his eyes. "I didn't see it," he said. "I thought I was doing right by you giving you a new family with Clara. But I should have asked what you needed. I should have listened." Ryan's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the ground, but he didn't walk away, a small victory in itself. The moment might have ended there, a tentative step toward healing, but the weight of years couldn't be undone in a single conversation. Evan glanced at Ryan, then back at David. "We need to keep talking," he said. "Not just about Mom, but about Clara, about everything. We've been carrying this too long." David nodded, his voice hoarse. "I want that. I want us to be a family again." Ryan finally looked up, his eyes guarded but softer. "I don't know if I'm ready," he said, his voice low. "But I'll try." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door cracked open, and for Evan, that was enough for now. The next evening, David's Craftsman house glowed with the warmth of string lights strung across the backyard, a space Clara had loved for its wildflowers and old oak tree. Sophie and Liam had organized a family gathering, a quiet attempt to bring everyone together after the blow-up. The dining table, now moved outside, was set with a simple spread. Clara's favorite cornbread, a pitcher of sweet tea, and a small box of Ellen's keepsakes at the center. Evan arrived first, his heart heavy, but hopeful, the scarf from his mother's box tucked in his pocket like a talisman. Ryan pulled up minutes later, his expression wary but present a sign he was willing to try. Sophie, her curls bouncing as she arranged chairs, greeted them with a nervous smile. "I thought we could do something special tonight," she said, her voice bright but cautious. "Not just talk, but remember, both our moms." Liam, usually reserved, nodded, holding a small laptop. "I found some old videos in Mom's stuff," he said. "There's one with your mom, too. I thought we could watch." Evan's breath caught, and he exchanged a glance with Ryan, whose eyes widened in surprise. David, standing by the table, looked equally taken aback, his hands fidgeting with a napkin. As the family settled around the table, the backyard bathed in the soft glow of dusk. Sophie opened the box of keepsakes. She pulled out a photo of Ellen laughing in a sundress, her arms around a younger David, Evan, and Ryan. This was at Biltmore. David said, his voice soft. She loved those gardens. Evan's throat tightened the memory. Vivid his mother's laughter, the way she'd chased him through the rose bushes. Ryan stared at the photo, his fingers tracing its edges, his voice barely a whisper. I forgot how much I look like her. The tension from the previous nights lingered, but Sophie's gentle persistence kept it at bay. Dad told us stories about her, she said, glancing at David. How she'd sing to you guys every night, even when she was tired from work. David nodded, his eyes distant. She had a voice like a lark. I used to think she could have been a singer, but she loved teaching too much. Evan felt a pang, realizing how rarely they'd spoken of Ellen, how her memory had been tucked away like the photos in the attic. Liam opened the laptop, his fingers hesitant as he queued up a video. This is from a family picnic maybe 10 years ago, he said. Clara filmed it. But your mom's in it too, from an old tape Dad gave her. The screen flickered to life, and there was Ellen younger and vibrant tossing a frisbee with a 6-year-old Evan, while Ryan, lanky and grinning, tried to intercept. The sound of her laughter filled the backyard, and Evan's eyes stung the grief as fresh as it had been 22 years ago. Ryan's breath hitched, and he looked away, his hands gripping the table. David's voice broke the silence, trembling but steady. I loved her so much, he said. When she died, I didn't know how to keep going. I had you two so young, and I was terrified I'd fail you. I thought Clara could give us a new start, but I didn't see how much you were hurting. I'm sorry. His words were a bridge spanning the years of silence, and Evan felt the knot in his chest loosen further. Ryan's eyes glistened, but he didn't speak, his anger warring with the grief the video had unearthed. Sophie reached for Ryan's hand, her voice gentle. When Mom Clara died, it broke Dad too. He didn't talk about it much, but he'd sit in her garden for hours just staring at the flowers. I think he's been carrying both losses in his own way. Liam nodded, adding, he kept your mom's things, you know. Clara made sure of it. She said you deserved to have her memory. The revelation hit Evan like a wave, softening the edges of his resentment. Clara hadn't been a replacement. She'd been a caretaker of their mother's legacy in her own quiet way. Ryan finally spoke, his voice rough. I hated you for moving on so fast, Dad. It felt like you forgot Mom, like we weren't enough. But seeing this, he gestured to the laptop where Ellen's image lingered frozen in mid-laugh. It hurts, but it reminds me she was real. And maybe you were doing what you thought was right. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, but it was a step, and David seized it, his voice earnest. I never forgot her, Ryan. I never will, and I never meant to make you feel like you weren't enough. I was just lost. The family sat in silence, the weight of their shared pain mingling with the warmth of the moment. Sophie lit a small candle, placing it beside Ellen's photo. For both our moms, she said, her voice steady. Liam added another candle, and the flickering light cast shadows on their faces, a quiet tribute to love and loss. Evan felt a tear slip down his cheek, not just for his mother but for the family they were trying to rebuild. Ryan reached for the scarf in Evan's pocket, holding it to his face, and for the first time in years he let himself cry. As the night deepened, the family shared stories. Ellen's love of gardening, Clara's knack for cornbread, the way both women had shaped their lives. David listened, his eyes red but attentive, and Evan realized this was what they'd needed all along, a space to remember, to grieve, to heal. The pain wasn't gone, but it felt lighter, shared among them. Days later, Evan stood in the Page Haven shelving a new shipment of books. A photo now sat on the counter, a recent one taken in David's backyard with Evan, Ryan, David, Sophie, and Liam together, smiling under the oak tree. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Evan's fingers brushed the frame, and he thought of his mother's laughter, Clara's kindness, and the fragile bridge they'd built as a family. In his mind, a quiet voice spoke clear and certain. Sometimes love means facing the pain you've buried so you can hold on to the people who matter most.